Well, the cold temperatures affecting some of the most vulnerable in our community, the homeless. Now, let's discuss this. We're now joined via Zoom by Stephen Underwood. He's a communications officer at U-Turn. Stephen, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Of course, it is a snow wonderland. I mean, a lot of South Africans love the snow because we rarely get a snow, especially here in Gauteng. But unfortunately, it does affect the homeless. Just talk to us about what are some of the stories or encounters you've seen over the past couple of hours in terms of the homeless.
Yeah, I mean, it is very, very tough for folks living on the street. In any winter conditions, obviously the wet, which also persists much longer. And yeah, when it's snowing at such extreme temperatures, it's actually a physical risk to the health of people. So yeah, it's a huge challenge for folk living on the streets in weather conditions such as these.
I mean, a lot of people obviously want to help. We heard from the Weather Bureau, the weather services, that at some point overnight it was -1 degrees. And of course, snow started a few hours later. So how can people help, the homeless, during this cold weather?
Sure. The main thing we need to address is look at this sort of long-term and holistically. So I would say the best way to help people who are living on the street in your area is to actually try and help them long-term off the street. So I would say get in touch with your local NGO that's in your area assisting those people, and also build a relationship with the folk and try and refer them into those NGOs. So at U-Turn, we do provide daily services, for example, warm clothes, hot meals, and also a place where someone can get out of the weather and just sort of have some relief from that biting cold. But if we're constantly providing that welfare on a day-to-day basis without helping someone off the street, we're actually just kind of leaving them stuck in that lifestyle. So our advice is to really try and look at it long-term. I know that when it's snowing and when it's cold and it's wet, we are more sort of attuned to the problem. But no matter what the weather conditions are, life is very, very tough for folk living on the street. So I would encourage you to reach out through your local NGOs in the area that you are, and also try and get to know the people living on the street and refer them into those NGOs for more long-term support.
I mean, just your analysis on just providing welfare and the dangers that can do, in the long term. It is quite easy, to have that short-termism kind of approach, which many of us have. You speak of long-term kind of approaches that you yourselves as U-Turn, undertake. Can you just give us a little bit of detail in terms of what are some of those long-term approaches? Because many a time people struggle with that. Do I give? Will that contribute to, the situation just perpetuating? Or should I, as you've said, join an organization that I can then funnel those funds through?
Yeah, so a short-term approach which is not helpful, for example, is giving cash, which very often ends fueling addiction and actually keeping someone trapped on the street. Providing welfare in terms of food or blankets or clothes, it does help in the short term. And I think in weather conditions like this, when people are really suffering, that is still important. But you do have to think about, whether you're actually then creating a dependency for the person. So at U-Turn, we utilize a voucher system where we encourage members of the public to give vouchers. They are known as My Change vouchers. We currently use that system in Cape Town. It hasn't arrived in Joburg yet, but should be arriving there early next year. And the vouchers allow members of the public to give vouchers rather than giving cash or goods to people living on the street. And then they can redeem those vouchers at homeless support centers, where they're tied in with the social workers and the therapy team that can help them off the street long term. So it kind of provides both. It provides a short-term relief, but also the long-term pathway for someone coming off the street.
And also, just talking about the homeless in this country, how bad is the situation? I mean, you have departments, various governmental departments that are, catering for them, or should be at the very least. But it does seem that the situation is not near where it should be in terms of finding long-term solutions that you speak of for the homeless.
So one of the difficulties is actually counting the number of people living on the street. So we do have a census, but the figures in the census are probably significantly underreported. We're looking at what we think is around more than 200,000 people living on the street in South Africa. And most of those are in the metros. Certainly in Cape Town alone, it's over 14,000. And there's also quite a lag between the number of people moving onto the streets in these difficult economic times and the data that we have at present. So I think part of that undercounting of people living on the streets means that the budgets are not as high as they should be. And also the challenge is it's multifaceted. It's very complex. So very often people living on the street are also struggling with either mental health or a substance abuse problem or both. So they need very specialized professional help. And that's also why we don't necessarily encourage members of the public to try and reach out in their own capacity, but rather work through your local government or rather work through an NGO that's got professionals who are qualified to work in those fields. We do know of long-term solutions, for example, U-Turn's 4-phase program to get people off the street, but it's also not necessarily a quick solution. It often takes a year or 2 years of a person really working on their personal development to be able to get themselves to the point where they're no longer living on the street. They're able to hold down a job of their own. They're able to maintain those social relationships and social networks that keep someone from living on the street. So I think those are the real challenges that we deal with. Is the problem is being undercounted and thus underfunded.